Hi guys, I wanted to show you a little demonstration about how this system works that I've created. We've got a front wheel bearing we've got to change on a four-wheeler. We've got to get the old one pressed out and press the new one in, and I want to show you kind of the benefits of using this system that I've created and just how it can make it easier. So what we're going to do first, we're going to press from this side down to press the old one out, and then we're going to get the new one and we're going to press it in this way. So first we're going to find the size end that fits in here, and we're going to use this face to press the old one out. Now you just take it and thread it on this adapter that you put on your press. Snug it up. Alright, so we've got the press face on here, and we've got our part jigged up. I kind of want to take a second and make a note how I would do this without this system. If I didn't have this, and say this is, well, this bearing here is fairly small, so it's not going to happen per se with this one, but by trade I've got bigger sockets, impact grade sockets that would fit down on this, and how I would usually do it is I would set the socket down in here on the part, and then I would bring the press down onto the face of the socket, and then I would press the bearing out. Now the issues with that is you'll start to, this face here on the socket, you'll start to kind of mushroom this in, so the material will go into this squared broach, and then when you do go to use this socket on an actual impact or on a socket or a ratchet, what happens is you can't get it to go in the hole because you've pressed material into the squared broach. Another thing too is your shaft is not always nice and square because you've been using it in instances where maybe you got pressure on it and it cocked off to the side. You can damage the end of your press that way. So then, and also when you're using a socket, not only do you have your loose piece here that will move around if you don't have it secured properly, because a lot of these things are not this nice and flat. This has a machine face on it, that's what we're pressing against right now. But a lot of times you've got it kind of not perfectly square, and then you've got one piece here, you've got one piece here, and then you've got your press, and you're trying to keep everything square and in line. And a lot of times that doesn't happen, and you'll kind of cock off to the side, and it's just not as ideal. With this here, it's attached to the press, so you don't have to worry about trying to make sure your socket is lined up over the center of the hole, and it's one less piece to have to worry about. So we're going to take this down now. Everything lined up. Now, because we don't have a socket here, we don't really need to worry about that. We've just got to move the part so it's centered on the anvil here. And we don't need to worry about making sure our squares or our socket stays square. We don't have to worry about mushrooming in the hole of the socket. And go ahead and just press it right out. And another thing, when you get the bearing all the way through, a lot of times the bearing will fall out and your socket will fall out, and it'll hit the ground and roll away. Most of the time it goes into another dimension somewhere, never to be found. So no more lost sockets, no more screwed up sockets, just this system. Now when we go to press a new one back in, I'll show you how the different size press face helps with the bearing, because we pushed the bearing out on the inner race because that's what we could get to. But when we go and push the new one in, we're going to want to press on the outside of this face. So I'll show you that here in a minute. Alright, we got this all cleaned up now, and we're ready to press the new bearing in. Now, especially with a smaller garage, you might not have a socket big enough to just press on the outside race of this bearing. Because you don't want to push on this black seal here, because that's not a surface to be able to press against. You'll ruin the bearing that way. And you don't want to push on the inner race of the bearing because you can hurt the bearing that way also. The best thing is to press against the outside bearing. Now, even if you do have a socket that's big enough, a lot of time there's such a big radius on the outside of the socket that really it doesn't make good contact here. And really sockets are not something that should be pressed against, if anything an impact socket, because a chrome one will shatter. and flake apart. So you don't want to do that. Now, take this off. Alright, and now we're going to use our next size bigger one. Now, it doesn't need to be perfectly around it, but what we're going to do is we just need to get it started. So a lot of times when we get a big bearing like this, what happens is if you do have a socket, you've got to try to balance this bearing so it's not in there crooked or anything, because you want to make sure this you want to make sure this bearing goes in square. So you're trying to hold the bearing square, hold the socket on it square, and then press down on the center of the socket. And that's a lot of moving parts to try to get this bearing started correctly. But with this system here, this face is less than 2/1000ths out around, or less than 2/1000ths perpendicular to the shaft of the press. So 2/1000ths is less than a human hair. So because this is so square with everything, we don't need to worry about this. This should square this bearing right up as we go to press it in. So we're going to go press it in now. Get it close, get it lined up. Now as we start to make contact with that bearing, it's going to square it up, and then it's going to press it down in. Till we get it, the press face to the outside of this, because now we have to stop, which eventually I'm going to make more specific size press faces. But for right now, to get bearings put in square, and if this was flush mount, if that needed to just be flush and we were good, then that's all we would need. So, but for this one, I'm going to use the old bearing set back on top of it, and then I'm going to continue pressing it until it's done, and then I'm going to take the old bearing out. But this system here, it's just extremely helpful for getting bearings started in flush and square, and it's one less piece to have to lose or to hold in straight. So I really think that this system is extremely beneficial. And then after pressing everything, everything's just finger tight. The threads on here only hold the attachment on. This face makes contact with the face on this, so there's no bind or pressure on these threads. So everything is just hand tight. You just tighten it up until it bottoms out, and then use it, and then when you're done with it, you just unthread it, and you put it back in the case till the next time you need it. So I'm going to go get that other bearing and get this finish pushed in, but that's the system. Thanks for watching.